Chapter 1. I was packing up my things ready to leave the hospital when Michael strolled in, casual as ever, like nothing was wrong. His eyes flicked over the neatly folded clothes and landed on the baby, who had been crying for what felt like hours. He frowned, annoyance creeping into his expression. "The baby's crying. Aren't you going to do something?" He paused for a moment and then added, almost as if it were an afterthought, "I've been busy these past few days. Was it really worth blowing up my phone over? You're fine now, aren't you?" I stopped in the middle of folding a shirt, my hands tightening around the fabric as I tried to hold back the anger simmering inside me. My voice was cold when I spoke. "Busy? Is that what you call abandoning your wife while she's giving birth and ignoring your newborn son so you can go take family portraits with your precious Jane? That's busy." Michael's face immediately darkened, his gaze hardening like ice. "Celeste, stop being so dramatic. It was just a picture. Do you really need to make this into such a big deal?" He crossed his arms, his tone dripping with frustration. "Jane's a single mom. He's got it rough. What's wrong with me helping her out?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Memories of that custom-made ring flashed through my mind, and I couldn't help but feel disgusted. "Helping her? Is that what we're calling it now?" I shot back. "You help her so much that you got matching rings custom-made? What's next? Sharing a bed?" That clearly struck a nerve. His face twisted in anger, and before I knew it, he grabbed the glass sitting on the bedside table and hurled it to the floor. The sharp sound of shattering glass pierced the air. "Celeste, when did you turn into such a nightmare to deal with?" His voice rose, filled with irritation. "Just grab the baby and let's go home. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." The baby, startled by the noise, began to wail even louder. My heart clenched and I rushed over to scoop him up, rocking him gently. It took a while, but eventually he calmed down and drifted off to sleep. I glanced over at Michael, who had been standing there the whole time, arms crossed, watching me with cold detachment. I could feel the weight of the words on my tongue, but this time I didn't hold them back. "I'm done," I said quietly. "Let's get a divorce." Michael's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with disbelief. "A divorce? You want a divorce, Celeste?" He took a step closer, his voice rising with incredulity. "I'm here, aren't I? I came to take you and the baby home, and now you want a divorce?" "Not a chance," he spat, turning on his heel and storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him so hard that it rattled the walls. I stood there, blinking back the tears, refusing to let them fall. It wasn't always like this. When Michael and I first got together, he was the one chasing me. I was the star of our college. Bright, ambitious, and full of potential. Michael, he was just getting started, a young entrepreneur with barely a foot in the door. He wanted more for me. He introduced me to his world. Lavish parties, high society events, opportunities I'd never have gotten on my own. After graduation, he poured all his resources into helping me succeed, and we grew together. We got married. It felt like the natural next step. I remember the day so clearly. Michael was on his knees, tears streaming down his face as he made promises I thought he'd keep forever. "Celeste, I swear I'll never make you cry. I love you. I'll always love you." And I believed him. God, I believed him. But that was before Jane came back into his life. His childhood friend. The one who was always like a sister. Or so he said. Since she returned, my life has been nothing but tears. Michael would skip my doctor's appointments to take Jane shopping. He left me 6 months pregnant, stranded on the side of the highway because she couldn't open a jar. I've lost count of how many times I've asked him to set boundaries with her. But every time, all I got was his tired, exasperated sigh. "Celeste, you're being paranoid. Jane just needs me. She's a sister to me." Sister. That's what he called her. And yet, the nights he spent with her became more and more frequent. One night I followed him. I watched as he walked into her apartment and didn't come out. I waited outside all night, hoping, praying that he'd leave. But he never did. When I finally worked up the courage to file for divorce, I found out I was pregnant. Michael begged me to keep the baby. He promised we could make it work, that we could be a real family. I wanted to believe him, so I stayed. But where was he when I was screaming in pain, bringing our son into the world? He was with Jane, taking family photos. It's almost laughable, really. How did I let it get this far? I snapped out of it, quickly wiping the tears from my face. I scooped up the baby, grabbed my bags, and with my body still aching from childbirth, I made my way out of the hospital. Thankfully, I had bought a house before getting married and it fully paid off. At least I had somewhere I could go. Just as I'd finally rocked the baby to sleep, my phone rang. It was Jane. "Hey Celeste. I'm so sorry about the other day," she chirped, her voice unnervingly sweet. "I didn't mean for Michael to miss the birth. It's just that, well, he insisted on coming to help me with the family photo shoot." Her words sounded apologetic, but there wasn't an ounce of sincerity behind them. I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. You know how stubborn Michael is. Once he makes up his mind, there's just no stopping him. I stayed silent, letting her prattle on, waiting to see where this was going. "And please, Celeste, don't let this cause any problems between you and Michael. I'd feel so guilty if you two ended up divorcing because of me." I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. So that's what this was about. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was fishing for information about my marriage. "Well," I said, my voice sharp with amusement, "if you're that into the trash, and then Michael's all yours. Enjoy." Before she could respond, I hung up, cutting the conversation short. If Jane had already asked about a divorce, it meant Michael had gone running to her as soon as he left the hospital. Typical. A man who couldn't even be bothered to care for his wife and newborn wasn't worth another second of my time. Garbage belongs in the trash after all. Just then I heard the front door unlock. Michael. He strolled in like he owned the place, not a care in the world. I stared at him, not bothering to hide my confusion. "What are you doing here?" He flopped down on the couch, completely unfazed by my question. "What do you mean, what am I doing here? This is my house too." He glanced around as if looking for something. "Where's the baby?" "Sleeping." He sighed, leaning back like he was settling in for the night. I thought about it, and yeah, maybe I should have told you about the whole Jane thing. My bad. So to make it up to you, I'm staying here tonight. As if that would fix everything. "Oh, and here's a little something for you," he added, casually sliding a small box across the coffee table toward me. "Now be a sweetheart and pour me some water. I'm thirsty." I ignored him, my attention fixed on the box. I opened it, revealing a ring inside. But not just any ring, the ring. The exact one from the family photos with Jane. I turned it over in my hand, and there it was, engraved on the inside. Jane and Michael. My heart sank, cold realization settling in. So this was it. This was how little I meant to him. He thought a recycled ring would somehow make everything better. I tossed the box back onto the table, my voice cold. "What is this?" "Jane didn't want it, so now you're giving it to me." Michael looked up, completely indifferent. "It's just a ring. What's the big deal? It's not like you wear them anyway. Might as well not waste it." He waved a hand dismissively. "Now seriously, water. I'm thirsty." The sheer gall of his words made my blood boil. My hands shook with rage. Without thinking, I grabbed the glass of dirty water from the table and threw it in his face. "You bastard." Michael shot up, wiping the water from his face, his eyes flashing with anger. For a moment it looked like he might actually hit me. I tensed, ready for whatever came next, but after a few seconds he just sighed, brushing the water away like it was nothing. "Forget it," he muttered, his voice calm. "You're clearly not thinking straight. I'm not going to argue with you." And then, as if nothing had happened, he asked, "By the way, where's the other bank book? The one you keep at home?" That's when it hit me. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here for the money. I'd always been the one to handle our finances. Michael had never cared where the bank books were, until now. And now, just hours after I mentioned divorce, he suddenly needed it. I narrowed my eyes. "Why do you need the bank book?" He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could get a word out, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face instantly changed. Without another word, he bolted for the door, slamming it behind him on his way out. I stood there, unable to keep a small smile from creeping across my face. There was only one person who could make him run like that. Chapter 3. Michael's sudden interest in that bank book got me thinking. It reminded me that I still had a few valuable things stashed at his mother's house. Things I wasn't about to leave behind. The next morning, I left the baby with Estelle, our nanny, and headed straight for Ramona's house. The place was empty when I got there, so I walked right into the bedroom Michael and I used to share. I pushed open the door, only to find the room filled with things that didn't belong to me. Makeup, clothes, all of it clearly Jane's. It had only been 5 days since I'd been in the hospital, and already someone else had moved in. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up a framed photo. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. Michael and Jane smiling together in that damn family photo. I couldn't help but remember how, once upon a time, I'd wanted to place our wedding photo on that same nightstand. But Michael had been adamant. No need to clutter things up with that, he'd said. Yet here was Jane, proudly displayed where I'd never been allowed to be. I put the photo back, my chest tightening. It was one of those moments where reality hits you hard. Michael had never been mine, not really. Some people are born to be cherished. I just wasn't one of them. At least not by him. But I was too tired to dwell on that now. I had other things to take care of. I went straight to the spot where I'd hidden my jewelry, planning to take back every piece. But when I pulled out the box, my heart sank. It was empty. Panic rose in my chest. Those weren't just sentimental trinkets. They were worth a small fortune. I tore through the room, searching every drawer, every nook. Nothing. What are you looking for, sweetheart? I spun around to see Ramona standing in the doorway, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. But when she realized it was me, her face fell into a scowl. Oh, it's you. What are you doing here? Didn't you say you were divorcing my son? Shouldn't you be gone already? I ignored her, my hands still rifling through the drawers. I'm just here to get what's mine, I said, my tone flat. Ramona's eyes narrowed as she watched me tear through the room. She stormed over, smacking my hand away with a sharp slap. What do you mean yours? Nothing in this house belongs to you. Everything here is ours. I stood up, rubbing my hand, and that's when I noticed it. Around Ramona's neck was my gold necklace. And on her wrist, my gold bracelet. Are you kidding me? Without a word, I lunged forward and yanked the necklace off her neck, and then grabbed the bracelet from her wrist. I wasn't about to stand there and ask permission. This wasn't the time for politeness. Ramona gasped, her hands flying to her now bare neck and wrist, her eyes wide with shock. You crazy woman. How dare you steal from me? My son bought me that jewelry. Her voice rose into a shriek. Help. Somebody help me. Celeste is robbing me. I rolled my eyes and calmly reached into my bag, pulling out the divorce papers I'd prepared. I tossed them onto the bed in front of her. Your son couldn't afford to buy me a sandwich, let alone expensive jewelry, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ramona's eyes flicked to the divorce papers, and just like that, her anger vanished. She picked them up, scanning the pages quickly. So you're really going through with it? She asked, her voice suddenly much calmer. But then a sly smile crept across her face as if she'd just thought of something clever. Well, good riddance, she sneered. After all, who knows if that baby you just had is even Michael's? But my 4-year-old grandson? He still needs his name on the family registry. She let out a laugh, clearly pleased with herself. I froze, the necklace still clutched in my hand. 4-year-old grandson? Chapter 4. Judging by Ramona's smug expression, that kid had to be Jane's son. Well, we've only been married for 3 years, but clearly he reconnected with Jane long before that. In fact, the child was born before we even got married. I stood there looking around at what used to be our bedroom. Everything of mine had been replaced by Jane's things. This room, this house, there was no place for me here anymore. And for some reason at that moment I felt a strange sense of relief. The sound of Ramona flipping through the divorce papers snapped me out of my thoughts. I refocused and kept searching. Right now, money matters more than anything. It didn't take long before I found all my jewelry tucked away in a small corner. With Ramona still engrossed in the paperwork, I quickly slipped the jewelry into my bag. Make sure Michael signs the papers. I'll see you both at the court tomorrow, I said, throwing the words over my shoulder as I walked out. Behind me, Ramona's curses barely registered. When I got home, I spent a little time with my son, calming him down before pulling out my phone to let Michael know about the meeting. But just as I unlocked my phone, I saw a message from my best friend who works at the hospital. She'd sent me a few images. These just came in. They haven't seen them yet, she wrote. I opened them. 2 DNA reports. The first one confirmed that Jane and her son Ryan were a 99.9% genetic match. The second one, it showed that Michael's relation to Ryan was practically non-existent. 0.000000001%. In other words, Ryan wasn't Michael's son. But it seemed Michael had no idea. I couldn't help but laugh at how absurd this whole situation was. Why on earth did Michael suddenly decide to get a paternity test? I texted my friend to ask, but she didn't reply right away. Not wanting to dwell on it, I decided to drop the matter for now. I opened my social media feed and there it was. Jane had just posted something. The most romantic thing is having someone by your side when you're sick. Attached was a photo of her, Michael, and Ryan. Michael was holding Ryan like he was his own child, looking every bit the doting father. Clearly, they hadn't seen the test results yet. But when I refreshed, the post had already been deleted. I couldn't help but smirk. This was going to be good. And there was no way I was going to miss out on the drama. Without a second thought, I uploaded both the divorce papers and the DNA reports to our family group chat. "Don't forget to sign the divorce agreement," I wrote. "Oh, and best wishes to you both." After I hit send, the once lively group chat went silent. "Aunt, what in the world is this? Uncle, divorce? Absolutely not. It's a disgrace. No one in our family has ever gotten divorced." I ignored the flood of messages from my meddling relatives and scrolled down to the bottom. At some point, Ramona had seen the messages and now she was on a rampage. "Celeste, what did we do to deserve you? To force my son to divorce? You'd even go so far as to fake a DNA test. I'm telling you, Ryan is my real grandson. Don't you dare slander our family." I couldn't help but laugh. I mean, have you seen Ryan? He doesn't look anything like Michael. And what exactly makes you so sure Ryan is Michael's son? I shot back. Once I sent the message, the group chat went quiet again. Ramona didn't respond. She was probably squinting at Ryan, trying to figure out where the resemblance was. I left one final message before closing the chat. "Tell Michael to meet me at the court tomorrow. We're getting divorced. No exceptions. No matter what, this marriage is over." Chapter 5. The next morning, bright and early, I gathered my paperwork and headed out the door. As I reached the bottom of my building, I saw Michael coming toward me, clutching a bouquet of yellow roses. His face, which had looked downcast a moment ago, lit up when he saw me as if he'd been given a lifeline. He hurried over, almost stumbling in his rush. That's when I noticed the unmistakable marks on his face, a red, swollen handprint and a few angry scratches. It was clear he'd been through some kind of fight. Michael held the flowers out to me, trying to mask his discomfort with a hopeful smile. "Celeste, these are for you. I went out of my way just to get them." If I hadn't seen Jane's post on social media yesterday, I might have actually believed him. I might have thought he had made some effort. But I glanced at the small card tucked in with the flowers. The message was unmistakable, wishing Jane a quick recovery. I met Michael's eyes, my voice cold as ice. "Seriously? You're giving me the flowers you bought for Jane? First it was the engagement ring. Now it's these flowers. Do you really think I want your leftovers? Michael, let's get one thing straight. I have no interest in things other people don't want. Whether it's a bouquet or a person." His face flushed as he awkwardly set the bouquet down, scrambling for an excuse. "Celeste, that's not how it is. I just didn't have time." "Save it," I interrupted, already done with the conversation. "The court is open. Let's go." At the mention of the court, Michael's whole demeanor shifted. His face darkened with anger. "Celeste, after everything you've put me through, you're still going through with this divorce?" I turned to face him, genuinely incredulous. "What did I put you through? Are you seriously trying to make this my fault? If it weren't for your complicated relationship with Jane, do you think we'd be here? How many times did I warn you? And how many times did you take it out on me because of her? And now that you've found out her kid isn't yours, you want to pin all the blame on me? Michael, you are the most selfish person I've ever known." I didn't wait for a response, letting my anger spill out as I turned and walked away. I wasn't worried about him trying to get into the apartment. I'd already changed the locks. He wouldn't be getting in again. But I knew one thing for sure. Today wasn't going to be the day I got my divorce. Just as I expected, it wasn't long before Michael came stumbling out of the neighborhood behind me. This was classic Michael, putting on this act of being a wounded lover whenever it suited him, when in reality no one was more self-centered or fake. In that moment, I wished I could go back to 3 years ago, to the day he proposed, and tear his mask off in front of everyone. I sighed and kept walking. The apartment wasn't safe anymore. Not for me, not for the baby. Jane and Ramona knew exactly where I lived. I couldn't stay there. So here I was, not even 2 weeks after giving birth, dragging my exhausted body around, looking for a new place to stay. Thankfully, some things had gone right for once. But when I finally pushed open the door to my apartment, feeling relieved to be home, I was met with someone I definitely wasn't expecting to see. Chapter 6. In the living room, my mother-in-law was holding the baby, playing with him. Nanny Mrs. Zhang looked at me helplessly. Upon seeing me, my mother-in-law immediately walked over with the baby. "Oh, you're finally back. Why did you change the locks?" I couldn't get in. I had to knock, but this servant wouldn't open the door. Said she was afraid I'd steal the baby. I'm the baby's own grandmother. Why would I need to steal? If I hadn't called out for so long, she wouldn't have opened the door. Mrs. Zhang is a highly experienced nanny, not a servant. Show some respect. I interrupted her rambling. I had specifically instructed Mrs. Zhang not to open the door for anyone. If my mother-in-law had been knocking for a long time, she must have caused quite a scene. I gave Mrs. Zhang a reassuring look, signaling it was okay. Given my mother-in-law's appearance, it was likely she was here for the baby. With Ryan no longer being her biological grandson, she had no one to continue the family line. Her hope now rested on my child. Thinking of this, I took the baby from her arms and handed him to Mrs. Zhang. After Mrs. Zhang closed the door, I coldly asked my mother-in-law, "Why are you here?" She unceremoniously lay down on the sofa. "This is my home. I come and go as I please. I haven't even confronted you about posting those photos in the group chat yesterday. How do you expect Michael to save face?" I laughed coldly. Did he consider my feelings? She wanted to argue more, but I changed the subject quickly. "Let's eat first." My weak body couldn't handle more arguments. If I couldn't drive her away, I could at least entertain her. During dinner, she kept piling chicken from the soup into my bowl. "You need up. You're still in your confinement period and need to replenish your strength." My mother-in-law's attitude was surprisingly gentle. Looking at the heaped bowl of meat in front of me, I remembered how she used to watch me eat meat with disapproval. If I took a piece of meat, she'd grimace and sarcastically comment, "You've already had 3 pieces. If you keep eating, you'll get fat and my son won't like you anymore. Son, eat up before she takes it all." She'd roll her eyes and dump the whole plate of meat into Michael's bowl. And Michael would always stay silent, never standing up for me. My mother-in-law continued to pile meat into my bowl. It seemed the revelation that Ryan wasn't Michael's son had hit her hard. After a moment of thought, I put down my bowl and tried to get some information. Why did Michael do the paternity test? Now wanting to please me, my mother-in-law answered my questions without hesitation. Someone said Ryan wasn't his biological child, so Michael made a bet with them. The test results came out. Why has our family been cursed to raise someone else's child for 4 years? Then her expression changed, her gaze becoming softer and more ingratiating. Luckily, you gave us another son. Yun, please don't divorce Michael. Stay and live a good life with him. I scoffed and showed her Jane's latest social media post. Michael doesn't seem to want a good life with me. The post showed Jane and Michael kissing, captioned, "No matter what, as long as we're in love." Clearly they had planned this together. Seeing the post, my mother-in-law stormed out. "That shameless woman. Always seducing my son. I need to teach her a lesson." She left in a hurry, exactly what I wanted. It seemed Jane was in for trouble. I quietly ate my meal, my eyes drifting back to the photo. Michael's clothes in the photo were the same ones he wore when he came to see me that morning. In the morning, he had asked for my forgiveness, and in the afternoon, he was being affectionate with Jane. He wanted to have it both ways. What a jerk. Chapter 7. After Mrs. Zhang and I finished dinner, I quickly packed up our things to move out. We couldn't stay there any longer. If my mother-in-law could find us once, she could find us again. Once settled in the new place, I deleted and blocked all contact information for Michael, my mother-in-law, and Jane. I later heard that my mother-in-law found Jane that evening and slapped her so hard her face was swollen. Michael, trying to protect Jane, got hit too. Apparently, Jane even lost the baby she was carrying, which was a little over a month old. When I heard this news, I couldn't help but feel a bit frightened. My mother-in-law's temper was truly terrifying. After a week of peaceful recovery at home, the property management contacted me to say my apartment had caught fire. The fire was discovered early and didn't cause much damage. I had cut off water, electricity, and gas before leaving, so how could there have been a fire? A bad feeling crept over me. I didn't rush back but instead checked the home surveillance footage. For safety reasons, I had installed several hidden cameras throughout the house. Now they were coming in handy. I played back the footage from before the fire. I saw someone breaking in through the front door. When I saw who it was, I was stunned. It was Jane. She looked around cautiously, holding a knife to check for cameras. The blade glinted in the darkness and I swallowed hard. After a while, Jane headed towards the bedroom. There were no cameras in the bedroom, so I couldn't see what she was doing. After a long time, I heard the sound of something breaking. My $1,000,000 porcelain vase was shattered. Shortly after, Jane emerged from the bedroom carrying a can of gasoline. She poured it everywhere, the living room, bedroom, and study. Then she lit a blanket on the sofa with a lighter. The fire, fueled by gasoline, quickly spread to the sofa and the dining table. In the firelight, Jane laughed maniacally. "Yun, if you destroy me, I'll destroy you." Hearing this, I felt a chill run down my spine. If I hadn't moved out that night, I might have been caught in the fire. I hugged my sleeping son tightly, feeling a wave of fear. No matter what, Jane had to be dealt with. I took the surveillance footage to the police station to report her. The police needed to inspect the scene, so they came back with me. I walked up first. As I rounded the corner to my apartment, I heard a noise. Before I could react, I saw Jane holding a knife and pointing it at me. Chapter 8. "Jane, what do you think you're doing?" I demanded coldly. Jane's eyes were puffy, her long hair disheveled, and she stared at me intensely. "What am I doing? I'm going to kill you. If it weren't for you, Michael wouldn't have found out Ryan isn't his son, and I wouldn't have lost my $50,000. The $50,000 was supposed to be Michael's reward for Jane having a son. I could see that Jane's mental state was unstable. "Jane, it was Michael who decided to do the paternity test, not me. Why don't you take it up with him? Besides, isn't he the one who always claimed to love you the most? How could he give up on you? We're about to get divorced. Once we do, Michael will be all yours." I tried to calm Jane down while subtly signaling to the police. Sure enough, when Jane heard about the divorce, she calmed down and called Michael. To my surprise, Michael arrived quickly. Seeing him, Jane pointed the knife at me again and shouted, "Michael, it's either me or her. Choose." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Then, in one swift motion, I disarmed Jane and said, "Do you really think you're his beloved wife, demanding a choice?" I pointed Jane out to the police behind me. "This is Jane." Seeing the police, Jane's face turned pale and she instinctively tried to run. But it was too late. "Let me go. Why are you arresting me? Michael, save me." Michael stood by, arms crossed, watching Jane being taken away without any reaction. In fact, he even moved closer to me, trying to ingratiate himself. "Yun, I would always choose you." I laughed. "Not necessary." The police confirmed that Jane had not only set fire to my apartment but also smashed my $1,000,000 vase and stolen some of my jewelry. With evidence and witnesses, the case was solid. Jane was ordered to pay me $1.5 million in compensation and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Before going to prison, Jane knelt on the ground, begging Michael to save her, but he pushed her away. "You brought this upon yourself." Hearing this, the hope in Jane's eyes completely shattered. "Michael, you'll get what's coming to you." Chapter 9. After leaving the police station, I stopped Michael, ready to tell him we needed to finalize our divorce. But before I could say anything, Michael was already shaking his head. "Yun, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. Can we not get divorced?" Michael pleaded, his eyes full of desperation. "Think about our baby. How can you bear to let him grow up without a father?" I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Because his father was busy being a father to someone else's child. "There's no room for discussion. We're getting a divorce." Seeing my firm stance, Michael's face went pale. He fell to his knees with a thud. Only then did I really look at him. In just a few days, Michael looked haggard. His eyes were filled with despair and pleading. "Yun, please forgive me. I truly understand my mistakes now. I promise I'll take care of you and the baby wholeheartedly. I'll never let you suffer again. Yun, I really love you. Please give me another chance." Michael covered his eyes with his hands, tears seeping through his fingers and falling to the ground, creating ripples. He thought I'd be moved, but I only felt endless disgust and hatred. "Michael, all the pain and suffering I've endured were because of you. Why should I forgive you? When you left me alone in the delivery room to take pictures with Jane, when the baby cried and I couldn't comfort him, did you ever think about our future together?" Michael opened his mouth to argue but couldn't find a single word of defense. "No, Yun, it was all because Jane manipulated me. I can't imagine life without you. I took out the silver ring from my bag and placed it in front of Michael. Remember this? When we got married, you promised you'd replace the silver ring. But 3 years have passed and I never got a new one. Instead, I saw you give Jane a custom couple's ring. Michael, you couldn't even fulfill such a small wish for me. Do you think you deserve to talk about a future with me? I didn't want to argue with Michael any longer. I left him with a "see you in court" and drove away. Michael remained kneeling, unable to move. After a while, he suddenly crouched down and wept bitterly. Chapter 10. After that day, I moved to a new city with my son, completely leaving Michael and his family behind. My son was an angelic baby. He didn't cry or fuss, ate well, and slept soundly. This gave me the energy to start a business with some friends. The project took off and the company's status steadily rose. I transformed from the little-known Ms. Shin to President Shin. Everything was moving in a positive direction, except for my marriage with Michael. The next time I saw Michael was at the courthouse. When he saw me, his previously dull eyes brightened. He approached me, surprisingly awkward. "Yun, it's been a while." His eyes scanned me up and down. "You look even more beautiful, just like when we first met." I nodded, not denying it. After leaving behind the torment of Michael and his family, I indeed felt alive again. Michael tried to hold my hand. "Yun, let's not divorce, okay?" I quickly stepped back, putting a meter of distance between us, and firmly refused. "No." "Why? Do you not love me anymore?" I shook my head, my words cold and resolute. "I don't love you anymore. Everything you've done has completely worn down my love for you. Michael, you can't mend a broken mirror. Let's go. It's time for the hearing." Michael stood there, stunned, his eyes filled with heartbreak. In the courtroom, Michael hesitated for a long time before signing the divorce papers. He didn't contest the custody of our child. "Yun, I know the child means a lot to you. I won't fight for custody." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Even if he wanted to fight, he wouldn't win. Now, I had more power and money than he did. Soon, the divorce certificate was issued. Outside the courthouse, Michael still couldn't accept it. He grabbed my sleeve tightly. "Yun, is there really no future for us?" I pulled my sleeve away forcefully. "No, there's not. And the child will never know he had such an irresponsible father." Michael stood there, unable to comprehend. I got into my car, disappearing from his world for good.